Ladies and gentlemen, we will now start the second plenary session of the APSACO conference entitled Sahel, Libya, Great Lakes, Conflict Trajectories in a Year of Uncertainty. Please welcome to the stage the moderator of this session, APSACO Besso, Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. Georges Charpentier, Senior CMI. And finally, Oussama Taibi, Senior Specialist in International Relations at the Policy Center for the New South. Before giving the floor to our
Merci. Je suis donc.
I'm Abdelhak Bassou. I am Senior Fellow at the Policy Center of the New South, and I am honored to moderate and to chair this session. So the title of the session is Sahel, Libya, Great Lakes, Conflict Trajectories in a Year of Uncertainty. I'm going to be very strict and ask our panelists that it's not only about Sahel or other or near regions, but other regions in Africa. Now, for the subject and for the mapping of it all, I think it would be it would be interesting to extend the the scope of the subject to other regions. Because other regions in Africa are impacted by separatism and other movements. So there are also economical and social and political consequences. There's also fragmentations and some reconstruction and rebuild. Before giving the floor to our panelists, we have an interactive question that will be asked on your phones. You can follow it on your phones. So, in one word, what is the common denominator between different tension points in Africa? We understand that there are consequences and there are regions that are suffering from it. So what is the common denominator? Nationalism, irresponsibility, heritage. So what is the tension focus in Africa? I think that we don't agree. There are many suggestions, many words. So now let's give the floor to our panelists. All the panelists, Colonel Birama, Georges, are my friends. Lamine Ould Mohamed Salem is a long-time friend also. And Oussama Taibi is with me every day here at the Policy Center. So, Colonel Birama, you are the director of the Center for Analysis and Research of the Sahelo-Saharan Space at EMP Bamako. So I'm going to give you the floor to talk to us about the issue or the subject of the panel. You have 7 to 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bassou, and thank you to the APSACO and the Policy Center for organizing this meeting, enabling us to share our opinions, point of views on a number of issues. A reminder, the world never knew as many conflicts since the Second World War. What is happening in the Sahel region, we can only see that we are failing collectively. The Burkina Faso case, the Nigeria case, and also others, the Libya. We intervened, institutions intervened, but we weren't able to resolve the conflicts. Conflicts are more and more complex. We do see new strategies, but they only complicate the problem, but they don't resolve it. And this is our intervention today, to explain a number of points, explaining why the different interventions weren't successful. when we try to process these interventions, we understand that we forget about a certain number of aspects. It's like, for example, if you have 3 doors to secure, but you secure only one. And here it is important to recall 3 phenomena characterizing the 3 regions, Libya, Sahel, and the Great Lakes regions. The first phenomenon, which is less important, it's terrorism. Why is it less important? Because statistics are talking about 7,000 victims, but when we try to analyze the different terrorists, they aren't that many. The second phenomenon is transborder crime, organized crime. They are implemented now in different cities, and the actors involved are in 1,000 or 100,000. So more organized crime is more important than terrorism. When talking about organized crime, it's about human trafficking, drug smuggling, human smuggling, forced labor, and so on and so forth. So when we are analyzing all the actors involved and all the phenomenon and the victims, I think that the most important phenomenon here is the organized crime. Citizens, when you ask them, they talked about thieves, and they talk about organized crime, but in strategies globally, people intervening in the region, this phenomenon isn't really taken into account. This is why, in my opinion, we are failing. In Libya, the region of Great Lakes, and the Sahel region. The third phenomenon is insurrection that can be against local communities or intra-communities or against the state directly. When talking about this part, we call it intra-community insurrection or uprising. And sometimes in some countries we have 2 governments. So we have a government that is against another. So these are the 3 phenomena that are shaking the regions. And we need to integrate them in our strategies. These phenomena intervene within mutations that are not well understood. Since the colonization, mutations are or were happening. We implemented strategies, but that didn't take into consideration these mutations or these phenomena. The geopolitical limitations are one of the reasons. And when we talk about the geopolitical aspect, we are also talking about the geostrategy. And today, geostrategies are an arm, because you can verify this, read about this, and what is even more worrying is money laundering when it comes to terrorism. It's like we are supporting terrorism and not fighting it. The second mutation is a security mutation. The security mutation through the perfectioning of the criminal and terrorist actions. I think that the Sahel and the other regions are big laboratories testing a certain number of terrorist acts or actions, and they are perfectioning their work. For example, financing. Financing is more and more perfect, and when talking about financing, we're also talking about illegal sources of terrorism and organized crime financing. When we compare documents and reports that were elaborated after 9/11, and if you compare them with the Sahel region, you will be scared. It is scary. The second or third mutation, like for example the zakat, forced zakat, or the ransoms. When you kidnap, for example, foreigners, we ask for a ransom. So there is a perfectioning of the criminal and terrorist action. And the other mutation is demography. Demography is shifting what was possible in 1961. In Mali, we were 4 million. Burkina Faso, 3 million inhabitants. The three countries united didn't represent more than 7 million. Today, they represent more than 70 million inhabitants. And Libya, today, I think it's around 7 million inhabitants. What was possible before is not anymore. If you allow me, let's talk about one of the last mutations, the climate change. Climate change is making it that more and more resources are scarce. So now we need to have an exploitation margin. So there are challenges, of course, because we need to fight against these phenomena, and we talked about financing. We need to fight against this phenomenon. There's also the perfectioning of the terrorist and criminal actions, money laundering. Sometimes money laundering has political support, and we need to fight against this. We have also conceptual challenges. Today we don't agree on different concepts, and we need to integrate this aspect, the geostrategical and geopolitical challenges, legal challenges, and the lack of coordination between the different legal bodies at a regional but also international level. We also have the lack of cooperation between security forces and the finance sector. I think that Sahel is making some efforts, but in the Great Lake regions, they are not doing the work, or they haven't done the work yet. In Libya, for example, it is even more complicated because we don't really have any structure between the two governments of this country. So, Mr. Moderator, this is what I had to say. Maybe in the Q&A, I'll answer some more questions. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you, Colonel and dear friend, for having respected the time. An important message from what you said, three phenomena, terrorism, organized crime, and uprisings. And the strong message is that these three phenomena are instrumentalized in the regions, the Sahel and the Great Lakes regions. Now I'm going to give the floor to Georges Charpentier, Senior Advisor, Middle East and North Africa, CMI, Marty Ahtisaari, Peace Foundation. Thank you, Professor Bassou, Mr. Moderator. I would also like to thank the Policy Center for having me, for inviting CMI. CMI is a private foundation from Finland, founded by Marty Ahtisaari, a Nobel Prize. He was awarded by the Nobel Prize, and I think that this is an opportunity for us, CMI, to understand better Africa, because we are always ready to learn.
Yeah, I took my notes in English because I can switch to English, but we have been talking a little bit about global order this morning in the first panel. So I will not spend too much time there, but clearly it's not that global order is being redefined, it's moving, I think. It's moving and in a sense, in a positive way, away from, let's say, unipolar Western let's say, assumption perspective to a more multipolar multipolar way. And why I'm saying this is positive, because I think we have framed global order around Western models for a very long time, and we were bound to get into a situation like this where we are a little bit lost, because the West represents, I don't know statistically, but certainly a very small part of the world population, and the world population, the large majority of the world population, does not necessarily think and reason like it is done in the West. So we see new players emerging, like Turkey, China, even the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE. The BRICS is coming up as a stronger organization, and I think we should welcome that, accept diversity and welcome, embrace and not combat that kind of move in the global order. At the same time, there is a decline in multilateralism, and I think this is sad in a way. I mean, the UN, the AU, regional organizations, like it was mentioned before, are losing their, let's say, impact and capacity to influence global politics, and that's in a way sad. But I will come back to that and, in the end of my intervention. In this session, there were mentioned three, actually they were talking about Sudan, I don't know why, but we can also talk about Sudan if you want. But Libya, Sahel and Great Lakes, very different root causes and different trajectories for these three cases. In the Sahel, we just heard Colonel Lee. It's seen as a positive change, as an awakening, as countries that are questioning conventional governance and international cooperation mechanisms, and this not coming from a political elite, but coming from the aspiration of the people of these countries. And then Libya, it's a very different case. I think since 2011, when the system of Muammar Gaddafi fell, broke down, the Libyans themselves have until now not really been able to take the resolution of the Libyan crisis in their own hands. And the international community has not always been helpful in sort of shouldering Libyans. But I think more importantly, Libyans themselves have not really been able to take it into their own hands. In DRC and the Great Lakes, DRC is an example of governance failure, where genuine dialogue, genuine and inclusive dialogue between all the components of the Congolese country and society has never really taken place in a rassemblement, in a constructive means. So they are still then suffering from that kind of lack of nation building and cohesion. So let me mention the three recommendations. I don't know if there are recommendations really, but I think for us especially us who are involved in facilitation and mediation, but certainly also research centers and academia and so on, it is important to listen to all the voices in the world, to listen to other voices, to accept and respect diversity, and not take it for granted or assume that our long-time conventional Western models of governance and crisis resolution are the manual and the ABC of everything. I think that's very important to also be able to question what democracy really means and what good governance also means, and open up to different kinds of solutions and different ways of resolving these issues. The other recommendation is to let countries who are in conflict, especially with internal conflicts, let them resolve their own conflicts, let them find their own solutions, offer space and opportunities. Sometimes people just don't want to talk to each other, and you need to trigger an opportunity for them to start, but let them at their own pace come up with the best way out. Sometimes we do not externally focus really on the interests of the conflict parties, because sometimes we don't even understand really what the interests of the conflict parties are. So we focus on interests that are coming from outside. So that is my second recommendation. And finally, that there should be more efforts in establishing mechanisms for global peace. There is really no one or nothing that deals with global peace. Global peace requires a long-term perspective approach and a preventative approach, which is absolutely not what is what is being used today in confronting difficult situation and in resolving crises. Everything is very short-term and everything is very reactive. And that doesn't help in finding solutions. So where should this global peace take place? I mean, we had, I think at the beginning there was a lot of hope for the UN to be, I'm concluding, the UN to be the instrument for that global peace. But unfortunately that has not happened and is not happening. There should be a major reform in the UN, more trust in the multilateral system. The Secretary General should become more a general than a secretary. And I think I will listen to Basu and stop there, and thank you for listening.
Merci, Georges.
Thank you, George. The issue of the Western order, the world majority doesn't really function or like the Western world. So we are shifting into a multipolar world and a new world order. And there is a decline in multilateralism. And your three recommendations: let the countries find their own solutions. Maybe we'll have questions about it. The countries we are talking about, the Congo, Libya, Sahel countries. What is the common point between these countries? Maybe governments that are not really useful and that are not really doing the work. Mr. Lamine, with Mohammed Salem, you are a friend, but now I need to call you Excellency Lamine Wild Mohammed. You are an ambassador chargé de mission to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mauritania. So I'm going to talk to you and to address you as Excellency because we are in a professional setting. The floor is yours. I'm happy, very happy, to be among you today at this event organized by the Policy Center of the New South. It is a very important event. I would like just to highlight that I'm talking on my behalf and not on behalf of the Mauritanian government or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Going to try to respect the 7 minutes. I'd say that in 2025, in the three regions that we selected, Libya, Sahel, and the Great Lakes, there is a certain uncertainty that is implemented, not only because of violence, but also because of the shift, the international shift, and it is usually very hard to understand. So we need to start by recognizing that the three regions are very different. In the Sahel region, we are witnessing break of the internal security, and the creation of the AES, the Sahel State Alliance. The coordination was already not that.
But it also has tackled gray zones and also jihadist groups, which are, and within this time, these three countries that were committed in military transition that seems to be not ending very soon. These transitions have become very rooted and have placed these countries in precarious situations where the political reasons have become difficult to see. So Libya, and since the final agreements and the treaties signed in 2020, is not evolving much, and the situation is persisting as it was, fed, of course, by international interventions, sometimes that are highly competitive, and the perspective of relevant elections continues and remains to be very far from its objectives, while the country is getting militarized more and more. We are mentioning, of course, Haftar and Ahmed Soudani, and the situation continues to be highly vulnerable and also unstable. There is also an intensification of the conflict between Rwanda and Congo and the rebellious groups with a human impact and the political impact, which is highly important in this region. So we have the eastern part of Congo, where we have many armed groups, and while the central state is trying to reaffirm its authority despite a political agenda which is different from the current landscape. So it's difficult to control a big country such as the Congo, Republic of Congo, and in this context. So in these three zones, what's quite impressive and alarming is the root causes of conflicts that are combined with the emergence of aggravating factors. We have the governance aspect, or the lack of governance, which is constituted by a common ground between the three spaces, the weakness of institutions and the marginalization of a number of communities and populations, the absence also of public services, and the feeling of abandonment, which is present among many populations in these three conflict zones. In addition to this, we have also identity problems and community problems, either in the form of a religious speech or ethnic speech, and also other triggering elements that are recent and play a crucial role, including the militarization of transition, instrumentalizing elections, and the fracture also that, or the breakout that exists between the different ethnic groups and between different regional areas, including the Great Lakes, Libya, and the Sahel region, which complicates the situation further. Other elements include the management of security, which was highly taken into consideration in these spaces. So the destabilization, the instruments of destabilizations are called for, and the United Nations is intervening in the Mali, in Mali as a country before its withdrawal 1 year and a half or 2 years after. And this has left a big emptiness where the different ad hoc alliances and local groups, as well as the alliance with the Israel state and the jihadist groups who are attempting to control certain zones and certain areas of the territory. So in Libya, the fragmentation is aggravating the paralysis, and we don't have sufficient frameworks that are inclusive and that can be done in a form of consensus around the Great Lakes, next to the RDC, A couple of initiatives are used for this purpose and remain limited, of course, with internal divergences, and some of them are linked to also external interferences. So multilateralism in Africa of peace has been put at stake with political rivalry, and what risks and what are the perspectives at stake? The first one is that there is a local escalation. The conflict is going to extend beyond the current borders, wherein there is an elevated tension between RDC and Zaire, and due, of course, to the presence of military groups and a reduction of the civic space. We know very well what's happening right now in the Central Sahel countries, and the loss of credibility from peace instruments facing, of course, their inefficacies. We are talking about instruments used by the ECOWAS within the Sahel region. However, there are many opportunities that are arising because there is an increasing demand from the local communities, and especially the ones who are legitimate. We have also the emergence of actors, including local ONGs, religious initiatives that can play the role of mediators or prevention. For instance, in Mali, the local communities and traditional tribes are playing an important role in lowering down or decreasing the number of conflicts on a local scale. So what partnerships and what tools do we need tomorrow? How can we put in place an instrumentalization which is in a place which is known for its fragmentation? In my opinion, we can reflect upon three main axes. The first one is to boost the different instruments of local governance through providing pertinent or relevant tools with, of course, by creating confederations. Would it be possible to be quicker, and so we can respect the time allocated to you? I have 1 more minute left. We have to also think about security patterns. We need to understand what has happened in the different military interventions that happened in Mali and learn from them. We have to also help the different citizens' initiatives that are most of the time neglected and even marginalized in institutional discussions within ministries, presidencies, and capital cities. In 2025 is not an easy year because this is a promising year for a turning point. It represents also the cornerstone of a visible strategy. So the challenge is here, but the question is to even rethink about what stabilization means and to put in place technocratic tools in order as a lever for the political and economic contexts. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. We have one panelist left, and before leaving the floor to him, I think that on a particular one question was asked to the public, and I think that during this time and while the panelists were intervening in these questions, the public has answered one question: what words qualifies best the current situation of conflicts in Africa? Reconfiguration, destabilization, or fragmentation? I think that fragmentation and destabilization are somehow close to each other, and this can give us a turning point to between 40 and 50. And I think it's the reconfiguration word which is not very interesting to use in this context. So we are between destabilization and fragmentation. For you for you. So what are the words that qualify best the current situation of conflicts in Africa? I think that if I can interpret it this way, if you believe that the conflicts are destabilizing and fragmenting, but are not coming to the point wherein they can elevate themselves to be at the reconfiguration level. Thank you very much for your interventions, Mr. Lamine. I would like to reiterate that you speak on your behalf, but there's also the question of G5. You spoke about institutions and a structure which was at the beginning going through these consequences. But don't you think it's time to rethink about the strategy, or maybe it was not very well conceived? And I'm wondering the following: can the current situation play a role which is different than other countries to reconstruct and to also rework on a G5 manner, G6 or G7? But I think, and I strongly believe, that what we have with the AVS, with a common structure of defense, can definitely constitute a departure point for a new structure of security and safety in the region. This is a question that I'm asking in a broad way before leaving the floor to you. Mr. Osama, over to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Basu. I'm going to talk following, of course, other interventions before me, but I'll try to focus mostly on the region of the Great Lake, and my intervention will be in English.
Is a complex crisis. We've seen it both in terms of its humanitarian impact, thousands killed, millions displaced, and of course the situation in terms of food insecurity. I've heard it's close to 28 million people in DRC today, but especially because of its regional ramifications. And we've seen that this conflict is basically a textbook case of regionalized conflict dynamics and post-conflict relapse and failure of peace agreements. So we've seen how those agreements, if not properly implemented and inclusive, will not lead to stability on the long run. And this is exemplified by the M23 justifying taking up arms once again because of the non-implementation of the Nairobi agreements of 2013. So we may disagree on the reason behind M23 taking up arms. Some say that this is because of the regional context, Rwanda and Uganda at that time being at odds, or because of access to land or access to natural resources, and also because of course, security threats, being the armed groups or the refugee question, and also intercommunal violence. But we've seen how M23 has taken a large territory across North and South Kivu provinces, and how this led to increased pressure on the UN peacekeeping mission. And we've seen the demonstrations, the attacks on the blue helmets that led to peacekeepers being killed. And we've seen also dynamics related to the emergence of auxiliaries to the Congo armed forces like the Wazalendo, and the emergence of a rebellion, namely the Congo River Alliance, which has a stated objective of overthrowing the DRC government. And of course, like it was mentioned previously, the deterioration of the relations between DRC and Rwanda, and of course, Rwanda and Burundi. So now we have two options. We can look at this with determinism and say this cycle was bound to happen, or we can, some will even say that this is not the first time that Goma falls, it's the fifth time in close to 30 years. Or we can look at how we can address the root causes of this conflict and the grievances of the parties when legitimate. So this is where there needs to be a political will, but of course there needs to be regional appropriation of this crisis. And this is in line, of course, with what most of us here will ask for and will lobby for the African solutions to African problems. So we've had peace processes, we've had the Nairobi peace process, focused on integrating armed groups and discussions between the government and the armed groups, but M23 was excluded. And then we've had the Luanda process focused on the relationship between DRC and Rwanda. And these two processes, even if they seem like complementary, but we haven't seen much coordination. And this brings us to the question of don't we need to rethink this, the principles of the African solutions to African problems? Especially in the current context. We've seen that African solutions to African problems is about appropriation of peace processes based on the local legitimacy, based as well on contextual understanding, but it is limited by external reliance, technical, military, financial areas, and on its own contradictions. And we've seen it in this case with multiple regional economic communities trying to deal with this question and not coordinating their efforts. We've seen it as well in the prioritizing of interests by member states and by the absence of rules when it comes to the principle of subsidiarity. We don't know when we need to take this a step higher, and basically regional economic communities can reject the blame, the African Union can reject the blame on the communities, and the communities can say that we're not properly tooled to deal with these questions. And this opens the door for extra African actors, and we've seen it with the Qatar mediation and also the United States. And before that with France trying to facilitate a meeting between Presidents Macron and Tshisekedi. And we really need to rethink this symbolic agency and look for concrete mechanisms. And we already have some of those with the African peace and security architecture that needs to be revitalized, and also with the Peace Fund that needs to be fully capitalized. So the context today is difficult. We've seen it with the UN liquidity crisis and the fact that very likely the multilateral peacekeeping as we know it, as we've known it for the past 30 years is over. And we've seen that the regional peace support operations were not able to deal with this specific crisis, be it the East African community and the SADC missions. So we need to rethink those mechanisms and see how we can move forward. To finish on an optimistic note, and of course with the cautious optimism, we've seen, even though those results were brought by extra African actors, we've seen that we're likely moving towards a resolution with the signing of the Declaration of Principles, the talks between the DRC government and the M23. And just this morning, the announcement that likely we'll have a peace agreement signed on the end of June. So not all hope is lost, but there are serious lessons to be taken from this conflict. Thank you.
Si Oussama, donc on retient ce...
Mr. Osama, we keep in mind this need of complementarity, and not only at the regional level, but in the African Union, but also regarding certain processes. You spoke about the Nairobi process and the Rwanda process, which seem to be complementary. We are coming to the end of this panel. Now, I'm going to leave the floor to you. If you have any questions or comments to make, we have 20 minutes exactly to answer your questions, and these 20 minutes will be for you and for them. I can see raised hands. The first one to raise her hand is the woman wearing a white vest or white blazer. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different interventions here, and we will take one more from here and 2, 3 interventions. So in total, we have 8 interventions. I ask you kindly to not make any comments. We do not want to start another conference. Please ask your questions or just briefly make your comment if ever you have one. We want to make sure that we respect the time, and we do not want to delay our breakfast, our lunch break. I would...
mechanism for global peace. But don't you think that we need more implementation? Because within the UN or within the African Union, we have continental early warning systems, we have preventive diplomacy, we even have preventative deployment, but they are not being implemented. So I would like to know more. What did you mean by mechanism for global peace? And also you said that we need major reforms for the UN, but now we're talking about Libya, Great Lakes, and the Sahel. Do you think that we need reforms for the UN to act in Africa, or we need to support the African Union so they would act in Africa? For instance, given the conflict in Mali, people were not happy with MINUSMA, and then after the departure, even when MINUSMA was there, there have been a lack of coordination between the different actors. There have been no alignment of peace processes. And then my last question would be, do you think we need a reform within the UN or within the African Union, or more how to rethink what's conflict prevention? Because the idea is conflict prevention is only before, but normally it's before, within, to prevent the escalation of conflict, and also after the conflict to prevent the relapse into violence. And that's what we have seen in Mali and DRC, we have different cycles of violence. Thank you.
Merci. Dans le domaine qui est le mien, l'économie et la finance d'entreprise.
So in my field, finance and economy, we say that money is the nerve of wars. In the different subjects that you tackled, wars, conflicts, in the Sahel region, in Libya, in the Great Lakes as well. We could have added to them Sudan, Somalia, and Eritrea, and Mali as well, and other conflict regions in Africa. We can say that money constitutes the nerve of the war, and in its real sense. My direct question is that you have mentioned a few sources of funding. You spoke about drugs trafficking, drugs trafficking, or guns trafficking. This, of course, could be the zakat sometimes, which is a forced zakat. I heard of it before. And to use this metaphor in finance, we can say that these are sources of self-funding. So all of these people are creating by themselves their own funding sources. And always in this metaphor, do we have any sources of loans or external sources that have the ability to self-finance themselves? And I'm speaking in particular about funding coming from governments outside. Can we mention them and enumerate them? Mrs. Tahiri Zubida Monjid. I am a member of the Moroccan network from women mediators and Organization of Women for Peace and Mediation. My question is about the following. Beyond all the different stakeholders. We have also other non-state actors that play an important role and have a great impact on the management of conflicts and resolution of these conflicts and mediation. The religious heads, or religious leaders, and other leaders in general, and also different civil society organizations. What can we do to make this legitimate? How can we do further to help them and provide support to them in actions of global peace and sustainable peace? Thank you. The question, or my question, is that there are many non-state heads, including religious leaders. How can we make their actions legitimate, knowing that they are very important in the management of conflicts, the resolution, and the mediation? Thank you very much. I'll try to be very brief. My name is Abkar Rita. And in 1989, Afkar was born, and this is when we have seen the jihadists come back to Algeria in the beginning of the 90s, who had led to a political crisis, and where we had seen many bomb blasts in France, and then they went all the way to Yemen and came back to Afghanistan to prepare their attack towards the United States. We have also the Middle East, Libya, the collapse of the regime, because here the difference in the terrorism is that is about the interpretation, or the extremist interpretation of religious texts. My question is to know if we have to purify, or maybe it's not important to purify the river if the problem persists in the source, which means that if we have terrorism and jihadism, it means that we still have conflicts that are ongoing and wars as well. So I would like to recapitulate what was mentioned by George. There is no global peace. If we are able to ensure a certain stability and global peace, I think that we can go beyond this problem of terrorism, especially that the Sahel region, it's easier to do recruitment because we have a very weak governance. And I would like to talk about the local governance, which was mentioned by Mr. Salem. We have a last person who would like to speak from this side. Thank you very much. My name is Esther. I'm in my first year of Mohammed's fifth university. My question is to Mr. Champartier. You mentioned that you have to let the countries solve their own problems and find solutions for the local context. I would like to take an example of the RDC. We are in a conflict zone, but at the international scale, we have different armed groups that are present. And this presence of these armed groups are also are international armed groups that are present in the country, and also other troops from the Rwanda and the RDC. Even in the report made by the United Nations, as it was mentioned last year. My question is to know if it would be a good solution to let the different states solve their own problems. We'll take the example of the Republic of Congo for internal and external conflicts. My second question is to Mr. Osman. Thank you very much for your intervention about the armed conflicts in the Great Lakes region. We know very well that we need to have a real political willingness to solve such problems, and I would like to know if we need to just have a political willingness, or do we have to combine a political willingness with a political maturity, because when we look into our African states, it's also a question of political maturity. We have this absence of political maturity which persists and which constitutes a real problem, wherein the states are not able to gather and around the same table and find relevant solutions. I think we understood very well your question. We will move on now to the other side.
Merci beaucoup. Fadwa Ammari, je suis docteur.
My name is Fadwa Ammari. I'm a researcher in the university, and my question is to Mr. Salam. I would like to take this opportunity in this conference of sharing and the collective collective and constructive feedbacks to speak to you about the Mauritanian experience in fighting against extremists. So you spoke about the collapse of multilateralism. You spoke also about the importance of traditional and religious groups. According to you, what was the most efficient tool or instrument used by the Mauritanian government in this sense in fighting against extremism? My name is Chassi Madani. I am working at Jeune Afrique as a journalist. My question is to our panelists. Since you mentioned that we are going through an important period of time, which could be a turning point, don't you think that the different conflicts that you mentioned in this session are a way to redefine the borders in our continent, especially that the borders were defined from a colonial perspective, and it has nothing to do with the social and cultural reality of the continent?
So you're the first rank, and then you, ma'am, you ask your question, and then we end with Mr. Hassan Sahi.
And I'm a student at New York University. I'm shifting the lens here to some political economy. So it's made obvious by the panel that the region is full of instability. So whether in the Sahel, the wave of coup d'etats that happened, or Libya, two different governments and around 2,000 militias in the country. I'm wondering or asking about when international organizations see these instabilities, they come in or intervene with solutions or band-aid solutions, depends how you define it. So if we see, for example, the IMF or the World Bank intervening, my question is, do you think those interventions are actually helping out the region or actually holding the brakes of development? And based on your answer, why is that?
Merci. Donc la question qu'on posait, Madame, première rangée.
Thank you. First, yes, here, just in the front. And then Mr. Hassan.
I'm one of the Emerging Leaders Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South. And my question goes to Monsieur Charpentier. You mentioned global peace, and I wondered who do we prioritize peace for, and who do we think peace is not necessary in the context of Africa? Thank you.
Merci, oui, Hassan.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Hassan Saoud. I am a researcher at the Royal Institute for Strategic Studies. My question is addressed to my colleague Lee. You have identified stakes in Africa, but you have processed them or tackled them separately. I think that terrorism is transversal. It is in weapons smuggling, in humans smuggling, everywhere. So as a global threat, and of course, terrorism is nurtured and by conflicts in Africa. So putting aside terrorism, which is based on a hybrid activity, seems not a fully fledged approach. It's a global threat, and the goal of states is to eradicate crime and terrorism. So not focusing more on terrorism, I don't think so, because it's a global threat that should be as well fought in a global way. This is what Morocco is doing in its anti-terrorism approach. Thank you, Mr. Hassan. Now I'll go back to the panel, telling you that you have 2 minutes to answer. You won't be able, of course, to answer all the questions. Lunch break is waiting for us. So 2 minutes for each one and 2 for me to thank everybody. Colonel, yes. Thank you, Basu. 2 minutes? Not very enough, especially that we had only 7 minutes to present and we wanted to leave time. We have the whole lunch break to carry on talking. Okay, well, I'll try. I'll try to answer 3 main questions. One related to financing, self-financing, and the state's contributions. As I said in my presentation, there are legal sources and illegal ones. In the legal sources, there's a lot of good things happening. And let me tell you that we are worried, we are concerned, because tomorrow's terrorism wouldn't need external finance. And what we observe in the Sahel, the global terrorism could be financed in the Sahel if need be. This is my point of view. Of course, some states were clear and said, yes, we have, because financing or funding is not only cash funding, it could be all kind of support. It could also be through distracting the weapons of military or armies, like we have seen the destruction of the Malian drone inside states as well. In terrorism funding, there is as well the media funding, the media support. I won't cite any media outlets. Sometimes terrorists do not pay the media. They have it naturally on some channels. Those are considerable supports. We have talked about self-funding. Self-funding is not necessarily what we mean it. So it's when a territory is conquered. And to understand this phenomenon, I don't know whether you know the phenomenon Hydra in Mali. So it's billions in 1 week for an activity he is organizing now called Ziyara. So this is the force of terrorism funding. There is zakat as well. Alms, today it is forced because zakat is a main an obligatory pillar in Islam, but the zakat is between the human and God. Now, terrorists oblige you to pay the alms, zakat. If you don't, you are obliged to give your son to the fighters or your daughter for a marriage with the jihadists. That's why. So, jihadists, they do not govern territories, they occupy them. We have to make a difference between governance and occupation. Governance is about the state's responsibilities. They have occupied some territories by terror, by force. I go back now to the civil society. Someone asked a question about them. We are all interested. All the people who are building peace. everybody concerned. We are the school of peacekeeping, and we want to promote it. And we noticed that on the Sahel ground, there isn't more. We have two players, the players of stabilization and destabilization. Every player knows his efforts. Sometimes actors could be local, regional, and international. And we will see which player will stabilize and which will destabilize. If not, they will be useful in mediation, but the civil society are entrenched in funding terrorism through charities. This is something we have to solve. In addition, to solve. Talking about civil society, we have talked about hybridation, the person who asked the question. Hybridation today is well documented. If you want the Camara model, we know the two phenomena go together. And today on the Sahel ground, if we take Yak Agali, did the three. He was trafficker, became terrorist, and now he's one of the jihadists' leaders. So it's a hybrid. Criminals could become terrorists, and terrorists could as well use terrorist approaches. What concerns the world is to view those crimes with the lens of terrorism and not crime. You see, it goes the insecurity. Colonel, you've already consumed 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Those are important. Just one final. We'll have time to talk about the hybridation. It's taken into account in our analysis. We have to fight the same phenomenon, but with different strategies. How could we redefine borders? It's not about redefining them. We have to transform them into borders that allow movement and not borders as barriers. So the terrorists unfortunately use them for movement, and we use them as a barrier. I'll stop here. And if you have any, Ms. Salamin, do you have something else to add? You could, take your time. I start by answering the question, the G5 Sahel. Do we have to create an organization? I think it's clear. We have to draw lessons from what didn't work in the G5 Sahel. Knowing the challenges confronting the region coming from Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. The idea of a G7 or a G8, why not could we think of a global reflection when we see the royal initiative of the Atlantic facet, the creation of the school? It's a deep reflection on how to create a new framework gathering those three entities. But one or two states must take the initiative and then include the others. Concerning the Mauritanian experience, just to clarify, I was not involved, but I was able to observe the design and the implementation of the initiative with many people involved, comparing it to what happened in Mali, Niger, Chad, Algeria. While Mauritania was still designing the strategy, I was following with journalists what was happening in the neighboring countries. It's simple. I could say it, and I hope that I won't be wrong. I think that personally, the fact that Mauritania is the first country to be targeted by the ex-Algerian GSPC outside the Algerian borders triggered a military reflex. So amongst the security services, and they understood quickly the seriousness of the situation, didn't wait for it to discuss it politically. They informed they resorted to religious leaders. They used families, traditional leaders. They have even developed a whole doctrinal corpus. There was a national dialogue triggered by imams and Salafi prisoners, and I think that 89% repented. So only out of 100 repented, 2 or 3 who went back to Al-Qaeda, and the others are now. This is all what I could say about this experience. There were many questions. Many questions were about the concept of global peace. I'll start with this. First, it will be at the level of the layout or format, an exchange and dialogue platform between the big powers, so the G7, G8, something that works well and is only limited to the great powers. So more important is the topic. I was talking about the long run and prevention. To actually manage the global peace, we have to analyze the effects of decisions made in a hurry. Well, in a hurry and a short term for X, Y political reasons. And what would be the effect and consequences of those decisions made quickly on the long run, on the state, on the balance of power, and so on and so forth. This reasoning is not taking place. We move from a reaction to another reaction to another one. So I think this is what I wanted to say concerning this question. Another question: how could we leave or just leave countries alone, solve their own problems? Even in the DRC, this aspect is very relevant. It's true, there are many, not a lot, but there are some players who give a regional profile to this conflict in East DRC. But what I would like to say, the country's authorities must be aware of the national internal conflicts and address them. And then after that, they could solve their relations with the other countries of the sub-region. But in DRC, you have mentioned it well, important ones, lack of cohesion and the lack of assembly of the Congolese communities or population. This weakens the nation, and we have to start by this. That's why the country has the responsibility of solving. Do you still have any other things to say? Thank you. Thank you, George. I give you the floor, Usama. Quickly, I will answer the question asked to me directly on political will versus political maturity. I don't think that we have to make the responsibles trivial. The question is clear. So there is a history. Without the political will, we cannot solve the real root causes of the country. So the absence of the will is what made the situation last.
I think I was listening the other day to Jean-Pierre Lacroix talking about mandates, and he was saying basically mandates are like Christmas trees. We're putting a lot of things into mandates and without prioritizing. And he thinks that there is a need to prioritize to make sure that those mandates can be effective. But again, this depends on member states, especially in the UN Security Council. And the other aspect is the legitimacy of the intervention. So if an intervention is perceived as legitimate, it reinforces the chances that it can help and will not hold development, like you said. Thank you.
Thank you, Usama. Thank you to all our panelists. And thank you to all of you, dear audience. And I'm sorry for the organizers for really taking that time. It was, I couldn't help it. Thank you very much.